Hey guys, hope you're doing well. I'm recording this the night of April 1st, obviously just a few hours out from Donald Trump's announcement of tariffs on so-called Liberation Day. I wanted to talk about this a bit more from the perspective of global U.S. power projection and how I see this playing out over the coming years. And I think to be really blunt about it, what we have to conceptualize is that the United States has a power projection strategy or has had a strategy of projecting geopolitical power really for the last, 80 years or so that relies upon, you'll hear this term a lot, right? You've heard it a lot recently, the rules-based global order. And I think this is, it kind of can create a lot of eye rolling, a lot of, what does that actually mean? I think a lot of people who aren't that familiar with what came before the 20th century, as imperfect and really in a lot of ways horrific as the 20th century was, the prior international order, really involved a lot more what would be called great power conflict, certainly when compared to the 20th century after the end of World War II, where great powers really were restrained from fighting one another through a series of technological and diplomatic accomplishments, not the least of which being nuclear weapons, but that's probably a different video. So this is to say the U.S. has supported and engendered and backed up this thing called the rules-based world order or global order. What does that mean? Really what it means is U.S. power projection, U.S. imperial power projection really has followed a different kind of a different set of rules and operating principles than other empires you might imagine. You can think about this sort of as a modification of some of the colonial empires. The Brits come to mind, but really it's more actually similar in some ways in my mind to sort of a Portuguese power projection where you have nodes, very consolidated nodes of urban nodes in particular for the Portuguese. In the U.S. it's more revolved around military bases and things like that. But this is how the U.S. has projected power, is really having these kinds of facilities scattered around the world. Well, okay, easy enough, I guess, if you can get, it's good work if you can find it, if there's a way to get someone to allow you to put a military base on their territory. How does that actually happen, though? And the way that it's happened is the United States has promulgated this idea that the logic that should undergird, or the logic that should create this world order really is derived from a set of rules, and those rules kind of are the rules of the road for trade and global conflict, and you can pick this apart as much as you want. There are many exceptions to this, including exceptions to this led by the United States. Iraq and Afghanistan come most readily to mind. But this system really, what it did, and what it's done is prioritize a explicit mutual understanding that the logic of power projection by the hegemon, the most powerful country in the world, the United States, really the logic of this power system is based on not on immediately and directly subjugating other countries, but indeed through creating this system that can be mutually beneficial to all parties. And as long as you broadly play by those rules, the United States is willing to overlook certain divergences from those rules, certain divergences from your domestic policy, sort of an agreed upon system that the United States as a hegemon will be relatively less directly imperial than other empires in the past. And what it will get in exchange for that is from certain key partners an ability to do basing and to do power projection and to have very, very close economic relationships with these countries, economic and military relationships. And this really is the system that's kind of created the global order as we know it, as everyone who's alive understands it for decades. And I don't think it's at this juncture, on the eve of the announcement of these tariffs, actually an exaggeration to suggest that entire system is now very much in question. And the reason that it's in question is really because the leadership of that global, power projecting hegemon, the most powerful country in the world, has become one that is not only skeptical or cynical to some of the benefits of such a system. It's actually, appears to be an administration, a regime that is downright antagonistic to that way of doing business, that way of projecting power, and just doesn't really believe that that's a way of projecting power that makes sense for the United States any longer. So really, I think that the question we have to ask ourselves is, people like John Bolton, former Trump administration official who's spoken a lot about this, is right. It shocks me to say that as a guy who disagrees with John Bolton on many, many things, including Iraq and Afghanistan. But he is an astute observer of Trump and the Trump doctrine such as it is, and I believe he's correct in saying that the Trump doctrine really is a transactional doctrine. It doesn't prioritize any kind of lofty ideology. It really prioritizes transactionalism and ability to do business. So when Bolton says there's this transactionalism that takes place, that undergirds, or this transactionalism that motivates the Trump doctrine and the Trump foreign policy, I think this really is the lens through which we can observe the Trump administration's behavior, both 1 and 2, and kind of find a logical map to understand these decisions a little bit more clearly. And what we have to ask ourselves is that transactionalism driven, I think, really through the metric of wins, wins in negotiation that can be promulgated through the media, pushed through the media to show success on the part of the administration. Is that system compatible at its core with a U.S. power projection logic that really is guided by a lack of transactionalism? That is to say, can a transactional Trump doctrine, if we are to believe that the underpinning motivation for Trump is to secure wins and losses in the media, to show success, to show active wins in negotiations with adversaries, with allies, with trade relationships, with other kinds of relationships around basing and prisons and all kinds of things, right? If this is the logic that drives this, is just things that make the administration look good, is that kind of raw transactionalism compatible fundamentally with this prior U.S. power projection logic that's been inherited and promulgated over the decades after World War II, that seems to be created through a totally different pathway, a pathway that isn't at its core transactional at all. It's much more establishing the field and the rules of the game, and in those establishments, making decisions that prioritize and privilege the United States, but not directly picking the United States as the winner in every situation. Is a system of U.S. imperial power projection that's deeply reliant upon the sort of soft power understanding that the United States won't transactionally demand it win in every single interaction, a system based in the trust that the United States will uphold sort of a global order that, while deeply imperfect, does kind of arc towards rules and arc towards the sovereign, the integrity and sort of sanctity of the sovereignty of individual nations to operate and make decisions without too much bullying from hegemons or regional powers, is a system of alliances that is so based in trust, compatible with Trump's transactionalism, and maybe more importantly, if it isn't, is a world without that trust, is a world without those alliances that uphold American power projection. Is that world actually one in which America remains the hegemon? I think it's a fairly convincing argument that America's power, as time has elapsed and our economy has become comparatively less central to the global economy with the emergence of China and India and Africa and everything else, and in a world in which our military advantage remains immense but will slowly continue to be degraded over time, inevitably, as power becomes more evenly distributed around the world. Is that world where our power becomes less relatively overwhelming, where our alliances become more and more the central component of our hegemony, is a world in which we eliminate that through the destruction of that trust that allows those alliances to flourish, compatible with American hegemony at all. We've seen in the last few days and weeks a reemergence, for example, of the People's Republic of China, Korea, and Japan working together to look at trilaterals, to look at free trade zones, to look at collaborative negotiating blocks to counter the United States tariff demands, to negotiate more on the same page with the United States as tariffs are rolled out. I'm not going to come out and say that that's necessarily that the sky is falling, but this is a huge indication of exactly the kind of problem that I'm talking about here for the United States in terms of its relative power. These kinds of trilaterals, if this is to be an important trilateral between these three countries, which it very well could be, it very well could not be, that'll take many years, potentially decades to discern. That's not really what I'm here to say. What I'm here to say is just the fact that conversation is happening indicates a massive rupture in the entire operation of how the U.S. projects power, which is ultimately through its network of alliances that is ultimately built on a more magnanimous, you could say, foreign policy that doesn't necessarily prioritize raw transactionalism in the way that the Trump administration now seems to be doing. And I think this should raise serious concerns for all of us to think about where this is going. There's many more discussions to have about this in terms of domestic economics, in terms of geostrategic security. But I think for tonight, I'll just leave it there and wonder aloud and ask you guys what you think about it. Do you think this really portends and promises a degradation in U.S. power projection as we've known it? As always, really appreciate you watching, really curious for your thoughts on this. It'll be a fascinating day, tomorrow for me, probably today or maybe yesterday by the time you all watch this. But as always, curious for your thoughts and comments. Thanks again.